Since the October 7 attack by Hamas on Israel, there has been a 482% rise in anti-Semitic incidents across Australia, according to the Executive Council of Australian Jewry. Meanwhile, Islamophobia Register Australia reported a tenfold increase in Islamophobic incidents. Earlier, I spoke to Danielle Jaku, the granddaughter of Holocaust survivor Eddie Jaku, also known as the happiest man on earth.
My name is Eddie Jaku, and I'm standing in front of you today as survivor of the Holocaust and a witness of the most tragic times in the history of mankind.
And Eddie's granddaughter joins us now. Danielle, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It actually made me quite emotional watching that.
That was the TED Talk, wasn't it, in 2019?
Yeah. It was so well received. I was in Paris, actually. I was getting texts from friends who were saying he had a standing ovation. Is that your grandfather? He's amazing. Yeah.
I remember watching it and just listening to it over and over again, and then getting his book, pardon me, and just being so inspired by the happiest man on earth who has gone through so much. Being his granddaughter, how do you think he came from, living through the Holocaust to being so happy and to have so much hope?
Well, he talks about it in his memoir, about meeting my grandmother and having my father, Michael, and discovering, that was actually a huge turning point for him, becoming a dad, coming to Australia. That coming to Australia was really what brought him back to life, I would say.
And we're seeing so much anti-Semitism in the world, but let's talk about Australia. And around the federal election in 2019, he wrote in one of the News Corp articles about what he had seen, and this was going back in 2019, and the concern that he had in the rise of anti-Semitism. Now we're seeing so much more as well. What are you hearing from people in the Jewish community?
I'm seeing a lot of big emotions. I'm happy to talk about the big emotions that we're seeing. Heartache for the hostages and for the families of those people who were murdered on the 7th of October. We feel a very deep, visceral feeling of pain when we're hearing the stories that are coming out, when we see 9-month-old babies or 10-month-old babies that have been taken, and so real pain, which is continuing because we're hearing testimonies now. We're feeling fear, the Australian Jewish community. We're rattled to the core by a lot of the events that have been happening here since the 9th of October, with the Opera House, the protests because of the Opera House being lit up in blue and white, as was being done in a lot of places around the world, the Eiffel Tower, Times Square, in solidarity before Israel even responded. So fear. We've seen a lot of fear around wearing Jewish uniforms, school uniforms. Mezuzahs are being taken down off doors. We're hearing about people being targeted in a Westfield food court, kids in their Jewish school uniform having food thrown at them.
We also hear so many of Eddie's quotes that are so famous, one including talking about hate, and he talks about hate is a disease which may destroy your enemy, but it will also destroy you in the process. What would you think Eddie would be saying if he was here now?
I think that would come out a lot. He would be saying that a lot. I'm asked a lot what my grandfather would think of what he's saying, and my response is that sadly I'm relieved he's not here to see this. He would definitely, I don't know that he would yet be able to be talking about hope, because it's really raw. We're really living the biggest rise in anti-Semitism that we've seen. I feel really sad for the Holocaust survivors who are still alive, the elders in the community who are watching this play out here in Australia.
And getting back to when he was concerned about the rise in anti-Semitism during the federal election in 2019, he had a quote that he said in news.com.au. He said, "It frightens me, but children only say, 'I hate Jews' because their parents say that," he told news.com.au in that interview. What would you say to those comments? He also said that they didn't invent that, you know, their parents did. Do you hear a lot of that type of narrative?
I don't hear that. I've heard him say that. I've heard him talk a lot about hate and, yes, that kids are born naively. They're informed by their parents and their parents' prejudices. I hear really from him more about kind of the need to love, and that's what came. I mean, that's messages that I remember from him, is to move away from hate. If I hear the word hate, I immediately have a reaction to it. If my kids say they hate anything, I'm very quick to shut down the language. It's just my formation from him. But I'm not. I guess the only children I'm seeing with hate are, you know, when I see kids with guns pointed from, they're not happening. That's not happening here. I'm not seeing that here. I'm seeing it on the news.
And this
happening there.
The Happiest Boy on Earth.
Yeah.
Tell us about that, because it's a children's.
It's his picture book.
Amazing. It's so beautifully written. One part there, he writes about, "Did you ever give up hope, Pepe? For some time I thought I would lose hope, but I held on tight because hope for the heart is like food for the belly. It nourishes us and sustains us."
So Pepe is French for grandfather. That's what I called him, Pepe, and that's what my brother and my two cousins called him. The Happiest Boy on Earth is his picture book. It's the happiest man on earth put into a simplified package of his story for children, with strong messages of empathy, compassion, and the dangers of hatred. He talks. I think it could help with a cultural shift if there are children who are, getting messages from parents about an attitude towards otherness and perhaps to Jews. I think it's talking about empathy and humanity at a time when people really need to have an injection of that. It names that hatred is still around all over the world, and I would say that the Jewish community's really been feeling it again, so, like we were saying, since the 7th of October, but there are still a lot of messages of hope in there.
On the back cover it says, "Life can be beautiful if you make it beautiful. It's up to you." It's very inspiring. And, you know, getting back to 2 years ago at the memorial, the State Memorial in New South Wales, during COVID, and you spoke at that. Certainly was a national treasure.
Yeah, I mean, his book had an unbelievable and unexpected success. It was, Pan Macmillan actually pursued my grandfather for a little while after they heard his TED talk. And we didn't think it was going to be of interest to people. So when they were, very persuasive in getting him to write his autobiography with his ghostwriter, and it had the success and was, translated into over 30 languages and was a bestseller for, a good couple of years, it became obvious that he was a national treasure. I've been stopped in work contexts and all over the place where people have recognised me because they've seen the photo in the book, the book that they'd read last Christmas, and they remembered looking at the family photos and they suddenly realised I was in that book. His flag has been up and down streets in Sydney, Oxford Street and William Street, and his photo's been on the light rail to advertise like the AI exhibition at the Sydney Jewish Museum, where he was a guide and really got to engage with so many people about his story. He was a national treasure, and I find it still quite surreal that it had so much success. I'm really touched that it had so much success, and it's so kind of makes me come down crashing when, you know, we had this success, just feels like just yesterday, and then you have this loud minority of people who we're hearing from in the streets of Sydney, and, you know, in various contexts that I could name. Vandalism on my favourite Middle Eastern restaurant in Surrey Hills, and local councils with messages directly to the Jewish community to intimidate. So it's a real contrast in feelings, like a feeling of absolute elation that he had such a success and there was such a beautiful response to him, and then a feeling of what the hell am I allowed to swear? What happened?
Yeah.